Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will get started shortly. I just wanted to give you a couple of housekeeping items. Please remember that it takes 7 to 10 business days to get your credit recorded on the portal. You will also receive a document in the mail stating that you received this credit. If you have questions during the webinar, and we encourage questions at any time during the webinar, please type them in the question box, and Dennis and Kelly will be happy to answer them. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dennis. He has over 30 years of experience in the insurance and risk management industry. He currently is working for One Group. He is the Senior Account Executive of Cyber Risk Specialist. He spent significant time employed by a national insurance carrier, working his way up from claims adjuster to account manager with complete responsibility over national accounts, including retention, development, relationship development, service, and risk management. Welcome, Dennis.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. As Kelly mentioned, please feel free to ask any questions as we go through the information. I'm going to give you some information on how to protect your business from a cyber attack, talk a little bit about cyber insurance, and then kind of end with best practices, not only from a business standpoint, but from a personal standpoint. So let's begin. So next slide, please, Kelly. So in the news, I'd like to kind of start here just to kind of talk about what's going on to kind of level set. So a couple of articles here is, Hive takedown illustrated by FBI. This is excellent. So, our government's been taking a really aggressive approach at going back after cyber criminals where we can, taking them down. Sanction them where we can. I mean, the government also just sanctioned 7 people from the TrickBot, Conti organization. So they're serious, about going after these folks. But sadly, as kind of the second article indicates, is that, the FBI has been warning about a wave of cybercrime against America's small businesses. So, so many times I hear, hey, listen, I'm a small organization. Cyber criminals aren't going after me, they're going after the organizations that are indicated on the bottom of this, and that's just not the case. We'll get into some statistics later, but they are targeting you rather regularly. But to kind of go over a few other things on the screen, so the CASIA article up on the top, the reason that's important is this was kind of a continued evolution of kind of a systemic attack. So the cyber criminals moved away from just attacking one organization to the ability to attack many organizations. So this CASIA attack, they attached some malware. Our evil group attached some malware and some ransomware with an auto update that went out to 1,500 of the CASIA customers got affected. SolarWinds, which you might have heard of, had about 18,000 customers affected because of installing a malicious update. Down on the bottom, we have a couple of notable ransomware attacks that I think everybody's heard about in the news. The JBS Foods attack, which resulted in them paying about $11 million in the ransomware. The Our Evil group was also part of that. On the right side, you have the dark side, or you have the Colonial Pipeline attack, which was generated by DarkSide organization. Colonial Pipeline paid about $44 million, or about $4.4 million in that one. The important thing about that one is the FBI recovered almost half of the money. The cyber criminals typically like to be paid in some type of cryptocurrency. In this case, it was Bitcoin. The threat actors did not move the money out of their account quick enough, and the FBI was able to get in and seize that money back. So a good result there. And then CNA in the middle there. This is interesting because CNA is a very large insurance carrier, as you know, in the US, and actually provides cyber insurance. They had a hack themselves. and it was a ransomware attack where they ended up paying over $40 million to the Phoenix Group that initiated that attack. So it's a little bit of everybody is involved in these things. On the side there, you have Log4j. So I'm sure if you folks do have cyber insurance, somebody might have reached out to you and said, do you have vulnerability to this Log4j? Roughly about 40% of US corporations are affected by this, that they use this Log4j functionality somewhere in their computer network. There's also been some recent attacks. So you've had Go Anywhere had a ransom attack recently. Reddit, the social media organization, had a ransomware attack lately, as did Go2 and LastPass, which is a password manager and cloud storage facility. So lots and lots of these in the news. Next slide, please. So who are these cyber organizations that we're talking about? So interestingly enough, after Russia invaded Ukraine, so many of these cyber organizations are part of either Russia or Ukraine or affiliated companies. And when one of the cyber groups came out and supported Russia, the Conti group, those Conti members that lived in Ukraine decided to push back against their organization. So they actually leaked code and additional information about the Conti organization. Come to find out, these cyber organizations act just like a traditional company, right? They have an HR department, they have employee reviews, they have employees of the month, they have bonus structures. It's a business. These individuals that work for them are just trying to do their job and make money for the organizations that they work for. That's what we're up against when we're dealing with cybercrime, and how do we, defeat it. The second article here I like to use because in a lot of my cyber talks I would talk about, you need to be worried about these cyber organizations. It's not Skippy, sitting in the basement of their parents' home with nothing better to do, so they're actually initiating cyber attacks. I had to eat my words a little bit there because this Lapsus organization was a bunch of 16-year-olds from England, Portugal, Brazil, and a few other places, which explained why their approach to how they were doing their attacks and how boastful they were was so different than any other organization, because it was a bunch of 16-year-olds. One of the new trends that we're seeing too is really a hacktivist trend. So these hacktivists are actually not necessarily for monetary gain, but for notoriety of their organization or to get their point across. They're actually, attacking organizations and explaining why they're attacking organizations. So it's not always just to make money now, sadly. There's some nefarious groups out there that are trying to do it for their benefit as well. Next slide, please. Even your organizations, funeral homes are in the news. So this is an article, and I don't know if any of you have had this experience, and if you have, certainly put it into the questions. This was a phishing scam that was issued on behalf of, to make it look like, the funeral home. Unfortunately, if you clicked on it, it downloaded some malware onto your computer and allowed those threat actors to now infect your computer and to be able to generate some income or just to steal your data off of this. So it happens all over the place, even in your industry as well. Next slide, please. So a few quick facts. So cyber issues have been around for a long time. The first hacking actually took place back in like the mid-90s. Was mostly kind of more of a hacktivist situation, just people trying to show that they could do it. Occasionally be malicious, wasn't really trying to generate money back then. It wasn't until 2017 when there was the Petya and non-Petya events where it hit really kind of a global scale, and things began to change after that. So as kind of the first bullet says, there's a lot, that's facing small businesses from a cyber standpoint. And one of the primary things is phishing attacks. It accounts for 90% of all the breaches to small business organizations. And they've grown year over year. It's a $12 billion business that's out there. So it could have some significant impact to you. And, people might say, well, we do have phishing training and, we don't have those situations. Statistics show that 4% of your employees are still going to click on a phishing attempt after they've been trained. Can't say it's all their fault though. These phishing attacks have gotten much, much more sophisticated. The ones a few years ago that came from allegedly Amazon or UPS or the Postal Service, there were really good key indicators in those that you knew that it was a phishing exercise or phishing attempt. The ones now are so good. It takes a really, really trained eye to identify that it's actually a phishing attempt. Beyond just normal phishing attempts, the new trend is more of a spear phishing. So spear phishing means that they're going after either specific types of individuals or after a specific individual. And this is when they're doing research about potentially you. If they want to attack your business, what are your interests? Do you like to fish? Do you have animals? Do you like dogs or cats? Do you have grandkids? Where do you spend a lot of your personal time? Do you belong to certain charity groups and do a lot for those charity groups? How can they gain your interest and have you click on their email? That's what they're trying to do. And like we talked about earlier, these really supply chain breaches is a real concern for the industry, especially from an insurance standpoint, because now one episode, can affect, like we talked about, Cassia with 18,000 customers, SolarWinds with 18,000 customers, and Cassia with 1,500 customers from one attack. So this is a really big concern in the industry about how can we manage this aspect. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about a statistic for small businesses, right? So there's a study out there, and this has been consistent for the last 5 years, that shows about 43% of the attacks out there are taking place against small businesses. Why do they do that? They know that many small businesses aren't prepared for a cyber attack. So they view you as an easy target if you haven't done things to protect yourself, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit, things that you can do to protect your organization and really your wealth, your money, within the organization, because that's what they're trying to get at. Another statistic that's not on here, but along with small businesses, is there's roughly about 60% of small businesses fail within 6 months after having a cyber attack. The reason that happens is that they didn't have cyber insurance to cover the cost of it. They didn't have a plan on how to recover from it. They just didn't think it could happen to them, and now they don't have an avenue to recover. So sadly, that's the reality of what we're dealing with. On average, it takes 277 days to identify and contain a breach. Just think about that. I know there was about 600 individuals that signed up for this today. Chances are within your organization, it may have been breached and you didn't even know about it. So that's a real concern. So when you fill out some of the cyber applications and they're asking if you have things in place, that's why they want to know, because they know not only can you be vulnerable in the future, but is there a chance that your organization could have been breached now and you don't even know about it? And sadly, it's really the human element that continues to drive the breaches. It's mistakes that we make. So one of the key to protect yourself from cyber events is still going to be training your employees, knowing what to watch for, knowing, if it's a phishing attack, knowing it's a phishing attack, and if you did click on it, reaching out to somebody to let them know that it happened so that they can try to contain that as quickly as possible. One of the other things that are taking place out there is fund transfer fraud, where one of your vendors is contacting you and saying, hey, we haven't got your payments yet. We wanted to let you know that we changed our bank. Here's our new bank and routing number. Please send these here. Or they're intercepting invoices that you're sending out and changing those now to include their banking and routing number. So that money's being sent to somebody else without your knowledge of it. So it's really training key indicators and how we can find things out. Next slide, please. So current trends that we see out there, right? So ransomware is just continuing to happen. It's getting more and more sophisticated all the time. So the ransomware attack used to just start where they would say, hey, we're locking down your system, we want money. People started not to pay, so then came the double extortion, which was, okay, not only did we lock down your system, but we exfiltrated a lot of your data, and if you don't pay us, we're now going to post it on this website. Now, the third part of that is not only did they steal your information, but now they've data mined it to find, is there any information out in that you don't want to go public? And they'll threaten to kind of put that out there from a public standpoint to embarrass, or maybe it's going to be a legal situation. They'll also reach out to your clients if they have that client's information and say, just wanted to let you know, we have hacked this organization, we have your data, they're refusing to pay the ransomware. If they don't pay it, we're going to release personal information about you. And even beyond ransomware now, we've seen the emergence of this wiperware and killware. And this is where it's really becoming kind of nefarious. So they're not even looking for money. They're just shutting you down from a wiper standpoint. They're just totally eliminating your network completely so that you can't function. Killware is similar to that, but then it also has a function where, sadly, people can become injured by it. We had a situation from a medical standpoint where a hospital was dealing with a ransomware attack. A child was born. They couldn't run all the normal tests on that child because of their systems being down. It ended up that the child did have an ailment that needed to be treated right away, wasn't identified because of the ransomware attack, and that child later expired because they were unable to do what they normally do. So there's more to it than just the money, right? So business email compromise continues to be the primary attack vector, which is really those phishing and spear phishing emails. You're also going to see that there's smishing, which is text messages that you're getting on your phone. All of that is the same thing. They're trying to somehow gain access to your account so they can download their payload of malware that can move laterally within your system and shut you down. Fund transfer fraud, I talked a little bit about earlier. That's about somebody getting you or getting one of your vendors to pay them instead of sending the money where it's supposed to go. This is getting increasingly difficult to identify, because I'm sure, as many of you seen, there's been kind of the advent of deep fakes, right? So there was the thing with Tom Cruise that looked like it was Tom Cruise, but it really wasn't. Or former President Obama, was talking and giving a speech about something, and it wasn't them. It was all computer generated. And this is becoming more and more common, to the point that even these deep fakes now have clone voices that can actually impersonate CEOs, CFOs, treasurers. So when you're trying to confirm whether or not you should be making that wire transfer or making that payment or doing whatever they're asking you to do, it seems like you're talking to that person when it's really not. So you need to come up with things to identify if you're really talking to that person. Ask them about their family. Ask them about their wife or their husband or their kids, and they're not married or they don't have kids. Just a way to clearly identify that you know who you're speaking with. We've talked about the supply chain attacks. This could be anywhere from software to managed service providers, cloud providers. All of those things are vulnerable and kind of open up the door. And with all of this activity taking on, we're seeing, of course, more and more government regulation that's out there. whether it's from the federal government, the state government, and actually other countries, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and fines continue to increase. I think it's been out in the news enough that cyber attacks are real, potential for your organization, that there's things that you can do to protect yourself. And for those organizations that aren't doing it, if you have a breach, in many cases, the state or the federal government's going to come down and levy fines against you. So next slide, please. So government regulation, there's all kinds of these. And we're going to talk about a few of these, right? So the GDPR, why is that on here? So the GDPR is actually a European Union Data Protection Act. And also on here, you're going to see the California Consumer Privacy Act. So if we're all in New York, why are we talking about these? The way that these regulations work is if a resident of those countries that make up the European Union or of California as well as other states, if you have their information and you were hacked, it could now end up being that you're going to be fined by these companies. It could be somebody living here temporarily. It could be a family member of somebody that you took care of. Could be any of those things. But if you have information about individuals that live outside the state, it could open up other privacy laws outside of New York. You do have some HIPAA information that you have to protect, so it could open up that. New York has come up with a Stop Hacks and Improve Electronic Data Security, the SHIELD Act. You can see by the date that this occurred right during the beginning of COVID. And because of that, there wasn't a whole lot of activity, but we'll talk on the next sheet a little bit more about that. California has now developed what they call the Internet of Things Security Law. So just think about this. Anything that connects to the internet, think about it in your home or your business, is hackable. We're talking video cameras, Ring doorbells, baby monitors, garage door openers, anything that you can think of that's connected to the internet is hackable. One way to hack it is to have a unique security device associated with that, a unique password instead of a default password. So California basically says anything that can be connected to the internet has to have a unique password issued with it. So it's helping protect those individuals. I'm sure some of you, on today might be going, well, what exposure does that really have? A few years ago, there was a fish tank in a casino that had a camera on it so that people at any point in time during the day could watch the fish swim. People find that comforting. So they watch it. The threat actors were able to hack into that camera, and then by getting into that web camera, they were then able to get into the network of the casino itself. So it's just additional access points that these threat actors can get into. And then, of course, the federal government has been getting involved with this too. From a federal standpoint, there's been quite a few executive orders out about improving cybersecurity. And even the Department of Defense is now indicating that those vendors that work with them, if they don't have proper cybersecurity in place, they can no longer be their vendor. They're just not going to accept them. And then also out there is a proposed American Data Privacy and Protection Act. It hasn't passed as of yet, but as we look at other countries, I would anticipate that something from a federal level is going to get passed very soon in the near future. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the New York SHIELD Act, since we're all in New York. So the way that this really expanded is really focusing on any potential access to data. So you don't have to prove that someone stole the data or took the data. If there's a chance that somebody gained access to data that they shouldn't have, that's now a reportable event. And it covers all kinds of information now: biometric, emails, passwords, social security numbers, driver's and non-driver's license number, credit card, debit card information, birthdays, all of that stuff is covered under this if someone gains access to it. And there's requirements based on the size of your company what type of cybersecurity you have in place, and how quickly you have to notify them. And there's been some recent settlements. IMED had to pay about $600,000 in fines to the state. Wegmans had a breach a little while ago, and they had to pay about $400,000 to the state. And then Carnival Cruise Lines, granted it was along with other states too, but had a fine of about $1.25 million. So it's significant fines that are coming out. And this is just the New York Shield Act. This isn't HIPAA. It's not any of the other states that you could have violated protection acts from. So it could get very expensive. The good news is if you do have cyber insurance, it could be covered. Before I move on from here, does anybody have any questions?
There are no questions as of yet, Dennis.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Kelly. So moving on. So one of the things that you don't want to see, and we've talked about it a little bit, next slide, Kelly, is a ransomware attack. And sadly, this is potentially what you could see. It'll pop up on your screen. You won't have access to do anything else. I love how cyber criminals are kind of helping you to help you understand what happened. It's telling you your computer's been infected. It's telling you that things are either locked or encrypted. It's telling you how much money they want from you. And because I'm sure a lot of you don't have some type of cryptocurrency laying around, they're telling you how to get the cryptocurrency so that you can pay them, right? Customer service at its best. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but it's true. They need to be very good to kind of explain to the people that they attacked what they've done, how to get their data back, and how to pay them. Otherwise, they would never get paid. It's also known that many of these organizations almost have like a Yelp rating, if you will, in terms of their success at giving you the decryption key and allowing you to decrypt the information that they've locked or encrypted of your information. So if that organization can't give you back your information, why would you ever pay for it? So it's important that they show you that they can do that. And it's interesting, the ransom attacks used to happen by these companies that we talked about, these criminal organizations, right? And they got all kinds of interesting names: Fancy Bear, Conti, Are Evil, Lazarus, Lapsus, Lockbit is one of the new big ones. Hive, we talked about, that the government helped to take down. Black Cat is a new one. There's also a new one, Black Bastra, which is kind of the old Conte group, because a lot of these organizations, if the government is successful in shutting them down, they don't really go away. They're a little bit like a phoenix. They just, come up from the ashes, get reborn, and they turn into another one. So it's hard to go after these organizations because in many cases they're protected by the country that they're in. So China has a huge, cyber criminal organization. A lot of the things they do is not necessarily to gain money, but to gain knowledge, right? So they're hacking organizations to steal their intellectual property. North Korea has a bunch of different groups. They're looking to generate income not only for themselves, but for their government. They share some of the money with the government. Russia has a lot of organizations that are somewhat protected by the country, as do most of the other former Soviet bloc countries. They have organizations that seem to be protected by their country. Iran and Iraq has them, so those are the type of countries that we're dealing with. And to make it even more challenging, now anybody, even you and I, if we want to be, we can launch a ransomware attack, because now they have ransomware as a service. So if you have access to the dark web, you can go to the dark web, buy a ransomware kit, has a whole how-to directions on how to do it. It has a customer service line so that you can call them if you're having problems launching the attack or decrypting the files or obtaining the cryptocurrency. It's a business, folks. They're doing everything they can to be able to generate income for themselves or the organizations that they work for. Next slide, please. So this is something from the FBI to kind of just show you the direction of where things are going. So it just continues to go up and up and up over the last few years. The 2022 data has not been released yet. I'm hoping to see that soon. I'm hoping we're going to see a little bit of a downward trend on things, because as you're going to see on the next slide here, from an insurance perspective, there actually has been a little bit of a downward trend. Now, granted, it went up exponentially, from 2012 through really 2021 is where it peaked. Slight decrease, that we started to see from 20 into 21, and then there's an anticipated decrease the rest of this year. We'll wait to see if it happens. A lot of this decrease has been attributable to many different things. It's been attributed to the war with Russia and Ukraine, because so many of the organizations are attacking each other and not looking to the outside countries. There's been a movement afoot to not pay the ransom. So if that's the case, these organizations had pivoted to do some other things. But I think there's a general consensus that hopefully that war will stop soon, and when that happens, we think that there's going to be an uptick in the cyber activity that's been going on. And also just for small and medium-sized businesses, Coalition is another carrier just like Chubb that does cyber insurance. They've actually seen a 57% increase in cyber claims with organizations of less than 250 employees. So the graph on the page here is really globally and what we're seeing as a trend, but then kind of when you break it down, there's some other trends that pop out. But what we've seen from a cyber insurance standpoint is that there was a huge increase in cyber claims and cost over the last couple of years, really kind of lined up, sadly, unfortunately, with COVID. And it just started to grow exponentially. Because of that, the cyber market hardened, premiums increased dramatically. We were seeing any place from 100 to a 300, increase in premiums. Luckily, we're seeing those begin to plateau. We're not seeing those types of increases anymore. But, there's still a lot more in-depth underwriting that's taking place. Gone are the days where you could give me your name, your website, and your annual revenue, and I could get you a bindable quote in 5 minutes. That doesn't happen anymore. They're really looking at, what do you have in place? How secure are you? How vulnerable are you? They're coming out with all kinds of security requirements and things that you need to have in place that we're going to talk about. We're seeing lower coverages and limits. A couple of years ago, if we wanted to get a $10 million limit on a policy, that wasn't hard to do. Now it's almost impossible on a primary policy. 5 million is about the most you can get, and then you have to go out to the excess market to get any more than that. Retentions used to be maybe $1,000. We've seen those continuously uptick. On small businesses, we could still get smaller ones, but in general, we've seen a progression upwards for those, and even sometimes co-insurances, which I would never support for our clients. It just makes it a challenge to really understand the coverages that you have. We see more declinations if you don't have the right things in place. And then, of course, a lot of subjectivities, requiring things like MFA, multi-factor authentication, EDR, endpoint detection and response. If you have Log4j and you haven't patched for that vulnerability, they'd have a subjectivity on that. They might have subjectivities on whether you're encrypting your data or not, or segmenting your data within your systems. There's just more and more subjectivities that we're seeing all the time. And along with that, these carriers are also generating a lot of new endorsements. A few years ago, they tried to utilize the standard war exclusion. That didn't work. So now many of the carriers are adding new war exclusions to their policies. We're seeing endorsements that are limiting coverage because of systemic events, those supply chain ones that we talked about earlier, for named vulnerabilities, which I find funny because almost any vulnerability that's identified or potential option for someone to breach you has a name to it. So that would exclude almost everything. They're reducing coverages if you don't have MFA in place, or if your patching cadence isn't on a regular basis. So we're seeing a big separation between those traditional insurance P&C markets and now those organizations that just focus on cyber insurance. Those that just focus on cyber insurance tend to have broader coverages and offer their clients many more services as well. But don't worry about it, all isn't doomed. You know, on the next slide here, you're going to see how you can position yourself for best for your cyber insurance. So you want to start your renewal process 4 to 6 months before the renewal. You want to see if you can get a cyber assessment from your current broker. You want to find out what your vulnerabilities are and how to resolve those vulnerabilities, because what we're seeing is if you fill out a cyber app, we send it out to the marketplace and they identify all kinds of vulnerabilities that you may have. Even if you fix those now, they still may not offer you coverage. And the reason why, we talked about it earlier, 277 days somebody could be in your system before you identify it and recover from it. So they don't want to take that chance that you've already had a hack. In most cases, these cyber carriers want you to implement MFA, multi-factor authentication. The reason that is many of them feel that at least or up to 80% of their losses are coming because of the lack of MFA. So they feel that 80% of their losses would not have happened if MFA was in place for their customers. They want you to secure, remote desktop protocol. A lot of people use this during COVID because they weren't going into their organizations. But that opened up a huge vulnerability because it also let those threat actors, those bad actors, come in and gain control of your system. They want you to implement what's called EDR, endpoint detection and response. You could kind of, think of this as anti-malware on steroids. It kind of really helps to detect anything questionable that could be happening at an endpoint, which is laptop surfaces, printers, servers, anything connected to your network, and then isolating it as well. You need to enable all email security because we talked about how vulnerable email is and how most of the breaches occur because of some business email compromise. You need to encrypt all sensitive data, no question about that. Carriers don't like when you have end of life or end of support software. So you need to find a way to remove or replace that. And then you need to have backups. You need to do it on a regular basis, daily, maybe multiple times a day. They need to be encrypted, and ideally, if you can, they need to be air-gapped, which means they're disconnected from the internet. They're not plugged into anything. Nobody can hack them once you have a backup. And then, of course, you want to test it to make sure that you can recover from it as well. Next slide, please. So a couple of things that you should be looking at, when you buy cyber insurance is there's two parts of it. There's third-party liability coverage and there's first-party liability coverage. The third-party liability coverage is what everybody used to think of. So, oh my God, if I get breached, I need to get an attorney, and we're going to need to pay for credit monitoring. We're going to need to set up a call center. That's what a lot of those costs, are. But really what you're looking for is those first party coverages. So how do you recover from a breach? You need to make sure that whichever carrier you choose, that they have good breach response coverages. Many of them have what's called a breach coach. It's a person who's typically an attorney in the claims department that can help manage that case and get all the resources assigned to your claim as quickly as possible, because the quicker you can mitigate it, the less costly it's going to be, and the quicker you can be as an organization back up and running. You want to have a couple of other things. You want to make sure extortion, including ransomware payment, is included. You want to have business interruption, independent business interruption if you can, digital asset restoration, and then two key things you want to make sure you have is computer hardware or bricking coverage, which is those devices that you're using to connect to your network, right? So your laptops, your desktops, your printers, your servers, if those get damaged, the policy would pay to replace those. And you also want to make sure that it has cyber crime and social engineering coverage on it, because your standard crime policy isn't going to cover many of these things that could occur. So you want to have that separate coverage. You want to make sure it covers that fund transfer fraud that we talked about earlier, because that is kind of a really growing aspect of cyber losses, is the fund transfer fraud. So you want to ensure that you have the coverage. Coverage for that is becoming limited. We used to be able to get full limits of the policy on that. They've now been sublimited pretty dramatically. Right now, if you can get about 250,000 is about the max norm that you can get nowadays for most policies. Couple of things to remember here is all cyber policies are different. None of them are the same. It's not like your standard workers' comp or your property or your auto or your general liability where they follow a standard ISO format. All of these policies are different. Their definitions are different. Their endorsements are different. What they cover is different. You really need to have somebody that understands these coverages and the differences to make sure that your organization is covered properly. And along with that is many times folks have what we'll call a cyber endorsement, an add-on to one of their policies. A standalone cyber policy in general offers much broader coverage than just an add-on endorsement to your policy. So where you can, I would encourage you to seek out that broader coverage if it's cost effective for you, because I know everybody's tight these days and you want to spend your money as economically and as best you can for your organization. But I don't want you to rely on those endorsements because they might not have as much coverage as you think they have. So next slide. Another thing that you should have in place is an incident response plan. So if you do have a cyber loss, what happens? This is, along with cyber insurance, is one of the key things to getting you back up and running as quickly as possible. If you wait until after you've had a loss to figure out what to do, it's going to take longer to recover from that loss. So you want to have, you want to prepare, right? You want to identify where are all your IT assets? What are they? Which ones are critical? Which ones hold sensitive data? Identify that first. And then if you have an incident, who do you call first? Do you have cyber insurance? If so, do you have their number someplace else so that you can reach out to them as quickly as possible? If you don't have cyber insurance, do you have a cyber attorney or a cyber security vendor that you can reach out to that can help you recover as quickly as possible? You want to make sure that you have the ability to detect and analyze any type of breach to your system. And then, of course, you want to be able to contain, eradicate it, and recover, because you want to minimize, the impact on your organization and remove any malware that's in your system, block any other external forces that are trying to come in, and basically restore your system as quick as possible. And then, of course, you want to be able to have a post-incident activity, right? What went right? What went wrong? How can we improve upon this if we end up, having another, God forbid, cyber loss? A couple of other things to consider on the next slide is you want to make sure that you're holding annual cyber drills at a minimum. It's no good having a plan if you don't know if it works or not. You want to select various areas of risk to kind of look at. So, financing, scheduling, electronic records, key vendors, a lost device, what's important to you. Like, make sure that you're doing a cyber drill on that to see if you can recover. One of the key things that we find is that, a lot of companies rely on a single person to maybe take care of if they have a cyber attack. But what happens if that person isn't available? Identify who a potential backup could be before that happens, because cyber criminals are smart. They're going to attack you at the worst possible time for you. They attack schools at the beginning of the school year or at the end of the school year for exams. They attack other businesses on the weekends when they know that people aren't going to be there and available to them. Because again, all of these organizations want to maximize the money that they can get with the least amount of effort. You want to make this part of your regular performance improvement meetings. And then if you do have cyber insurance, you want to find out what services are available from them. Most good cyber carriers have a host of cyber hygiene and resiliency services available to you. So take advantage of those. In many cases, they're free. Don't go out and pay someone to do something. You can get it done for free. CISA is another organization that's out there. that offers a lot of services for any business in the United States to be kind of help them. And I have some resources after we get done with the presentation, so you can feel free to reach out to them. But on the next slide here, we're going to talk about some best practices. We've talked about a whole lot of things right now, so I want to kind of, push everything down into a couple of really good takeaways. So you need to increase your email security and phishing training. That's really a best practice. We talked about so many of the breaches occur because of email and because of phishing, right? So you want to do everything you can to prevent that. I know MFA, multi-factor authentication, is a pain, right? Because now you got to click on something else to verify it's you, but it's key to securing your network. So you really need to do that. Have backups, in most cases, on your phones, on your Surfaces, on your iPads, there's an automatic backup function. Enable those things. Have backups in case you do have a breach. Make sure they're encrypted, they're air gapped, they're tested like we talked about. You want to be able to secure all that remote access. Easiest way to do that is have a VPN, virtual private network, with MFA associated with it. That's the easiest way to secure remote access. You want to make sure you're updating and patching your software regularly. Have a normal cadence for doing this. There's more and more vulnerabilities that are coming out all the time, and more patches that are coming out every week, and more critical patches that have to get done because it is a critical vulnerability that can negatively affect you if that's the software that you use. So, definitely patch, and I'm talking about your phone and your iPad and your Surfaces, anything you have that's connected, update those, because when you're getting updates, it's usually because of some type of security concern, not because they want to make it look nicer. So definitely up those. You want to use a password manager or a passphrases. You want to make your passwords as hard as you can. Anybody want to guess what the most used password is still? I'll see if anybody responds. It's pretty easy. Most used, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and very closely behind is actually password. So still today, as much as
someone did guess 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. That's awesome. Yeah, it's sad, but people continue to do that, even though there's been so much education about it. You want to be able to scan for malicious software, those EDR, endpoint detection and response tools we talked about, encrypt all of your data like we talked about. One of the things that you want to look at too is you want to find favorable third-party and vendor contracts. Most of these contracts are going to limit their liability to the annual cost of the contract. That's not good enough. If you have a breach that's caused by them, I guarantee you it's probably going to cost you more than what the annual cost of that contract was. So you need to make sure that you're having people be responsible for what they should be responsible for, and that you're not taking that on. That's a good risk transfer, methodology in a lot of things. You definitely want to set up awareness training for your employees. I mean, training and education is really key, both from a business standpoint as well as a personal standpoint that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And then, of course, we talked about it last is, create and practice a cyber incident response program. Know what you're going to do if, God forbid, you have that loss. Because sadly, with this many people on the phone, it's going to happen to somebody this year, this month, next month. Somebody's going to have a loss, and the quicker you can respond to it, the better off your business is going to be for it. Next slide. So a couple of things from a personal standpoint is your home network is just as vulnerable as your business network, right? So change your router password. Consider using a VPN. If you have all default settings on anything that you've connected to the internet, think about changing those to a unique password. Protect your personal information just as much as you protect your business information. Don't use public Wi-Fi. I mean, if you're checking social media, on it, that's one thing. Don't do banking, don't do taxes, don't do any of that stuff, because public Wi-Fi is just that, public. You could have a man in the middle situation where You're sitting at Starbucks on their free Wi-Fi doing your banking, and someone sitting next to you is stealing all of that information completely unbeknownst to you. So don't do it. Use MFA and account alerts as often as possible. Things like Google and Microsoft all have these enhancements on them. Allow those to take place. If you're buying stuff online, don't save your credit card online. Just go through the steps of putting it in. You're just making it too easy for someone to hack your credit card data. And if you are buying stuff online, credit cards offer more security than debit cards. So you want to always use a credit card. Just like in your business life, you want to use strong passwords and passphrases. You want to really be careful what you click and respond to, right? The whole thing about cyber criminals and people trying to take advantage of you is they want you to panic. They want you to feel some level of stress and anxiety so that you know better, but you click on it anyways, right? So just be cautious. Don't panic. Just if it doesn't feel right or seem right, don't do it. Don't click on that social media site link to go buy the thing that you want. Open up a new tab, search for that business and then buy it directly from them. Because that way you're not dealing with a farming situation where somebody has mirrored that website and now is stealing all of your information. And of course, you want to educate your family. I mean, it's the sad scenario of things. I've actually seen children's books, made for toddlers that kind of start talking about cybersecurity and things to protect themselves and the family. There's been commercials out there about where there's a little kid yelling from the other room to their mom saying, "Hey mom, what's my social security number? Or what's our password for this?" Sadly, these criminals will prey on anybody. And you not only have to worry about them preying on your data and your information, there's also virtual kidnapping that's taking on right now. And it's happening by people identifying that you have family members that are away at college or maybe traveling to another country. They call you up, they tell you that they've kidnapped that individual, that you must pay them right now or harm's going to come to them. They get you all panicked and nervous, and you end up giving them your banking information or you transfer money out of your account to them without even having an opportunity to talk to your loved one, because they're so good at this. They keep you on the line. They keep you so stressed and panicked that you just don't know what to do. So be careful for those. The FBI has put out a lot of information about that. Yesterday, there was Valentine's Day. There were tons of Valentine's Day scams, tons of them out there. That's what these cyber criminals do, right? They're being opportunistic and preying on you wherever they can. A couple of other things just to kind of talk about your own network. There's been plenty of instances where people's home security cameras or baby monitors have been hacked and things have taken place. There was this woman in South Carolina. There was another one, I think in Illinois, where they're sitting downstairs and all of a sudden they hear noises coming from their infant's room. They go up and find that someone's talking to their child through the baby monitor saying, gross and obscene things. They pick up the baby, run downstairs, and now that person that hacked into the system, says, "I can see you," because now they have, control of your security cameras. Causes, of course, who wouldn't freak out about that? There was a group in Australia that actually hacked into people's homes to their security cameras and was live streaming those for anybody that wanted to watch. So just think about that. You could be sitting home working or on a Sunday or doing whatever you're doing and someone's watching you. How sick is that? But that's the type of individuals that we're dealing with so many cases. So whatever you can do to protect yourself and your family, you certainly need to do. Next slide, please. So I mentioned there's a bunch of resources available to you. Kelly, I'm going to make this slide deck available to you and you can send it out to the members. There is a host of cyber resources that are available to you. Maybe we're having a little bit of technical issue here with it coming up, but I'll make sure that you guys get it. CISA is an organization that has a ton of information. The FBI does, NIST does. There is an insurance company called Coalition that we use quite frequently that has a link there that you can actually go in and get a cyber assessment to see how vulnerable your network is. And then that's really it. The next slide was just my contact information and then a thank you. So I appreciate everybody's time today. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to take them now.
Great. Thanks so much, Dennis. We do have a couple questions. What is the name of the company you quoted that offers free cyber coverage?
Not cyber coverage from an insurance standpoint, but help. So CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's a federal organization, CISA.
Great. And the next question is, are FIDO keys an effective investment?
Spell that one more time.
It looks like it's an abbreviation for FIDO, F as in Frank, IDO.
I don't have enough knowledge about that to make a comment one way or the other. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Well, that is all the questions we have now. So again, I will thank you so much, Dennis, for joining us today and providing such valuable information. We've all either potentially been a victim or, you know, are the next one. I will remind everyone that we ask that you give us 7 to 10 business days to record your credit on our portal, and you will receive something in the mail. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out to us here at the office, or Dennis's contact information is on the screen. And I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thanks again, Dennis.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great day, everyone.